Hello everyone, and welcome to my first, at least, narrator's vlog for Idalos development. I am Basilisk, the head narrator, I guess, for Western and Central Idalos, and creator of, by the point players are watching this, probably more things than what I've created when I'm actually making this video. But we'll get to that stuff in other videos down the road. Anyways. Sorry about the angle. This computer has some weird quirks that I can't really solve. It's Windows 8. But anyways, I figured we would start this whole vlog off by talking about how we got into deciding where we were going to start make our first starting region that we're going to put players in. The cities, which are, as you probably know, the cities of Melrath and Devorian. Whoa, wrong image. Okay, now, way back when we were starting out developing, divvying up areas to work on and all that, yes, I talked with my hand steel. We batted around a few ideas. The first actually was Martyr's Landing, which we found, had already actually been, just before that, staked out as one of the areas Aura was developing. So we wound up not being able to use that. After that, 3 areas were put on the table for us. One was, of course, the mouth of the river where Melrath and Devorian are now. You know what I mean, damn it. Then that little peninsula, I guess, off to the west of Melrath, and then that little valley right above it with the river flowing through it. Those were the 3 areas I remember, at least, that we wound up choosing from. We wound up choosing where we did because we got to looking at where Melrath and Devorian are now and thinking that if we put 2 cities on either side of that river, it would be a great place to start it would be a great place to put we would have room to do a lot of high tension, high drama plots with like a lot of action, intrigue, stuff like that. At the time of this, we haven't quite figured out what we're going to put there. Could be plots vying for control of the river trade, something like that, I don't know. Well, when we figure it out, you'll probably know about it. It'll probably be figured out by the time any players are actually seeing this, so there you go. But yeah, that's how we wound up picking that area. And at the time of this, we haven't done a whole lot of development for those cities. And as time goes on, I'm sure we'll all talk about that more and more. You know how it goes. My apologies. Now, at the time of writing, we haven't gotten much in for the skills. I think somewhere between 5 and 7 skills have been developed. So we're not going to talk over much about those. I'm not, at least. The others can if they want. And, of course, stuff like the ancient history for the forum, maps, how everything got started, the songs and tales, and at this point even monsters and villains. I haven't done any of that. So I'll leave that for the people who have done about it. I probably will have stuff for monsters and villains at least later on as we get further along the development cycle and more stuff gets done. But actually, at the time of this, I at least have only been working on the site for 5 days. This is my 5th day. And from my understanding, it's been up since the beginning of the month, and this is the 13th. And for a good long while, it was just Jade doing development. So we haven't actually been working on this for very long at the time of this. So you'll have to bear with me for there not being a whole lot of content, but, you know, what can you do? Anyways, I figure with that set aside, we're gonna look at some of the stuff I worked on before writing this. Those are mainly the Ithical race, and 2 immortals, Ethelynda and Raskalarn. So, we'll start with the first thing I really developed, the Ithical. Let's get to it. Alright, with the Ithical, sorry, I'm still having a little trouble with that. It's supposed to be pronounced Ithical, but the ith sound comes a bit more naturally to me, so I slip it up a bit. Anyways, for that, for the Ithical, my first thought, the big thing I want to develop, even after being given the jungle as my first area to really work on before finally expanding over to the entirety of Western Idalos and eventually Central, was I wanted to do a snake race, a snake type race. Now, as you might guess from my name and avatar, I am fond of snakes. It's not rocket science. Now, one thing I didn't want to do was make a snake race that was just the usual savage, kind of bestial, cruel race, torturers, all that. And you've seen it a million times before. Most of the time, a snake race is just about a few notches of civilization short of above monsters, if they're even above monsters. So, when I got into it, and plus they're always in either a desert region, like the Hotlands, or a jungle region, such as the Uzkernia jungle. I really hope I pronounced that right. I totally forgot to ask. Okay. Anyways, when I was developing the Ethical, one thing I did not want to do was just make them into another, like I said, was just make them into another cruel savage race, and I didn't want to stick them in their usual areas, such as the Uzkernia jungle or the Hotlands. I've already said that. Now I'm babbling. Back to the point. So, one of my favorite kind of societies is the kingdom type society. The protectorate, the area that focuses on protection. It's got the knights, it's got nobility, honor, courage. You know it, you've seen it in every MMO, every book, every game, every kind of movie. You know it. But again, with those, what I wanted to do something a little different from that too. Rather than make it the human-controlled monarchy that you usually see, I wanted to do something a little different. And I started thinking about a militaristic kind of culture. But usually when you see those, they're dictatorships or something stupid like that. They're never something good, a militaristically controlled culture. So, when I was creating the Ethical, I had three things I wanted to do. One, at the time I was developing them. I wanted to make a snake race that wasn't cruel or set in a desert or jungle region. I wanted to make a kingdom area that wasn't a kingdom type area, the protectorate knights type thing, that wasn't just your standard, run by a monarchy that's been established for centuries, that, an ancient hero set up, and everyone was just like, it's amazing. And I wanted to do a militaristic thing that wasn't just a bad, tyrannical, evil type of place. So, I looked at these three pieces and I said, you know what? Let's put them all together. And that was where the basic idea for the Ethical came from. I sort of wanted to do, the appearance, of course, is based off the basic Lamia. Human torso, but from the waist down, it's snake. It's a snake tail. You've seen it in just about everything. Again, it's another one of those really common things. My big contributing factor was to stick chainmail and plate mail on the bastards and make them into knights. The appearance isn't very original. I wasn't trying to be. So, I took the Ethical. After I did that, and the name was a bitch. I think I got it off a fantasy name generator. Put in a focus on T's and H's, okay? But I took that, and usually your fantasy kingdom is set inland, or on an ocean border. Since we already had, Malrath and Ivorian on that river, I thought it would be kind of neat that instead of making the two human races or the two main starter cities, both human-controlled, I thought it would be kind of cool if we made at least one of them controlled by a non-human species. Something that maybe had human appearances, such as the human torso, but wasn't human. Couldn't be construed as human, and it was just not human. So I decided I wanted to put my Ithical in one of those two cities. Now, around this time, I forgot to mention this in the first segment, sorry, we worked it out that the two main cities would be collab cities, and we talked it out, and it was worked out that the Ithical would be set in one of the two. At the time, it was Melrath, but when I took over Central, it might be changed to Ivorian. I'm terribly sorry, I keep stumbling over that name. It was decided on last night, so I'm still getting used to it. So after that was decided, when I got to making them, I wanted to make them militaristic without making them evil, the kind of evil, cruel kind of group you see when you think about militaristic nations. Usually when you get a militaristic nation in fiction, it's basically kind of like Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia or a pissy version of Rome. It's never a good thing. So the first thing I actually wrote for the Ithical was that creed right at the top of their page. And I was thinking, you know, if a military society actually devoted itself entirely to protecting the people within its bounds without oppressing them, it would be a lot more well received. And that's what forged the entire concept for them, was that one notion. That if I made them militaristic but incredibly protective, a group that was devoted in their entire being to protecting the people that were under their care, whether they be other Ithical that were civilians and hadn't joined the military, or just members of other races that were looking for a safe place, a place they could survive in the world of Idalos, which is not a safe place, okay? The Immortals are waging war, and everything is various degrees of fucked. Seriously, when I get around to working out the jungle and the desert, it's bad. It's bad over there, okay? But with that in mind, I kind of built their culture around that notion. They're protected. I made them protective, incredibly disciplined soldiers. They're kind of what every army in the world, or at least every army run by a good nation in the world, had in mind when they joined. It's what every soldier I know that ever went to the army thought when they first went to the military. I'm going in, I'm going to protect people, I'm going to save lives, keep people safe. That is their culture. Now of course they have their little quirks. That sweet tooth of theirs, the fact that they really don't eat vegetables or fruits or breads except at big meals, and their dislike of bartering or bargaining over goods, which they think of as being something that could bring a lot of unnecessary conflict and danger into someone's life if someone gets pissy and decides to, pull out a knife or something. They're in the middle of a bargaining thing and they don't like what's going on, so they're just, going to cut somebody up. But, that's how it is. Now, and of course their language. Now, if you read their history and religion were two of the last things I developed. History, language, and religion were the last three things I developed, sorry. I keep forgetting languages even there. So, their laws, as you might notice, aren't particularly strenuous. They're very much based off American society laws. I am an American, sorry if that if anyone takes issue with that, have fun. I don't care. Wow, this is 9 minutes long. So, after I got everything settled, culture, uh, interactions with other races. I mean, they're a little, oh, you poor bastards need protection and we'll protect it, but they are welcoming of the other races. It's not exactly racism. It's just kind of a bit of a, uh, we're a more uh, civilized culture sort of thing. It's it's not supposed to be personal, but they might come off as arrogant. I don't know. That'll depend on the players. Um, it's not exactly my intention for them. Screen's dimming. But, what I want and what takes place ain't always going to be exactly similar, I mean, I'm not going to try and restrict the creativity of people who want to play as the Ithical just because, it doesn't quite match what I had in mind. Because first off, outliers like that are always fun. They make the race feel more real as a whole. And on top of that, why not? Now, when I got to making their history, their religion, their culture, I wanted what they are to make sense. So, this group of Ithical, and I'll get to the Raskalarn a whole nother time. They're going to be mentioned briefly in the next two segments, but I'm not going to get into them in detail until a whole nother video. The Raskalarn the Ithical started off as peasants in a fishing village. They were nobody. The main thing that they were terrified of being overrun and wiped out in the giant war between immortals. However, at the same time, they couldn't bring themselves to turn anyone away, because they were just good, honest people. So when Ethelynda showed up all injured and hurting and in pain and needing help, they couldn't bring themselves to turn this immortal that they were terrified of, to turn her away. So they took her in and treated her wounds, and when assassins came, they defended her. Now, of course, Ethelynda was reminded of what she was back before she was betrayed by the original Ithical, the Raskalarn as they are now, and gave them their powers. Now, I'll get more into that in her segment. You'll see. But now after that, she stayed with them, started teaching them martial skills, molding them into what they are now. And of course, they built up the city that they're stationed in out of their old fishing villages, and their names, the name of their city, and the names of their rank, the names of their cities, their military ranks, they're all taken from villagers from the original fishing village that died defending Ethelynda. Their religion, of course, has a lot of militaristic overtones, as it is a militaristic culture. It's just a really good example of one. It's what one should be, in my opinion, at least. Okay. Now, so they don't spend a lot of time on religious, ceremony, because in their mind it's something to be done before or after a battle, and you don't have a lot of time. Like I said, it's like inspecting the troops, but shorter, and inspecting the troops usually doesn't take that long. Alright, and of course language. They were originally human fishing peasants, so their language is pretty much common with a few little quirks added to it, such as the naming habits, and the fact that since the Ithical look on everyone in their city that they live in as part of their family, they don't have individual surnames. They're all, from their city. So, say an individual Ithical's name is Joe, and the city's name is Bob, then they're going to be Joe Bob, and that sounds really redneck, and if any player actually freaking does that, I'm going to be so pissed, because I'm never naming a city Bob. Don't do that, it's bad. This is what happens when I don't really think about names too much. You get shit like that. But with that's pretty much the entire thought process that went into the Ithical. I really hope that anyone who's looking at playing an Ithical really enjoys this, and they have a lot of fun with it. In the meantime, let's move on to talking about Ethelynda. Alright? Okay, now we're talking about Ethelynda. She is the patron immortal for the Ithical race. Now, Ethelynda, as you might be aware, and probably are aware in fact, is the immortal of nobility, honor, protection, and of course, snakes. Because snakes are awesome, and they don't get enough love. Um, Now when I was making Ethelynda, now, okay, in any other setting, the immortals would probably be called gods or goddesses, you know. Now, the usual, again, like with the Ithical, my idea for Ethelynda was to do something that I hadn't really seen done before, and not make the snake goddess someone that was, the snake immortal, someone that was cruel, sadistic, or just cold and uncaring. So, because actually when you get right down to it, snakes are actually really friendly folk, once you get to know them. Like, some are kind of pissy. I mean, I wouldn't advise cuddling up to a copperhead. But something like a king cobra, which is actually one of the most venomous snakes in the world, is actually a pretty mellow guy. Most of his bites aren't. Only about 10, maybe 20% of the bites, king cobra bites on humans, don't actually involve any venom. It's more like a dude, get off my property kind of thing, if that. I mean, my dog's asleep, or I'd call her over here and kind of show you what I'm talking about. But it's basically just them kind of doing this number. Not really trying to bite you, just kind of either telling you to go away or maybe being affectionate. I don't know. Depends on the case, I guess. But with all that in consideration, I wanted to do something that wasn't normally done with a snake deity, with Ethelynda, and that name was a pain. The name wasn't that hard. It's actually, I think, a variation. It's a variation on, I think, an Anglo-Saxon word. It is that means noble servant. Sue me. I just thought it fits, so I'm not probably not gonna change it. But onto that. So after I made the Ithical, I already had them down as a militaristic, protective culture, and for something like that, I wanted, of course, someone that would be in their mind something very protective, someone very protective. And for me, that also counts to someone having, someone that would create a militaristic culture that would revolve around that and keep it in line, would be someone who is very noble and honorable. Kind of a knightly figure. Like what people think of when they think of like King Arthur or Charlemagne or something like that. So that's how she got her spheres of influence. Now her history was interesting because I wanted to have her be coming out of a neutral phase when she made the current Ithical. Like it was sort of a, like her making them was sort of a, how do I put this? Sort of her realizing that the mortals aren't what she thought they were when she went into, and was her regaining her faith in the people of Idalos. So when I started her, the first part of her history actually talks about her making and going with an original race in a way, you know, reviving dead people and it makes snakes, whatever. An original race of Ithical, which was more feral in appearance, you know, scaly, snake hair. It looked more like a traditional Gorgon than what you think of when you think of a Lamia or maybe a Naga, whatever. The reptilian features, the scale bodies, the snake hair, all that. And she started training them, and originally they were like the Ithical are now. Protective, honorable, good folk. But eventually Ethelynda decided that they were going to be fine on their own, and she left. Which led to them, without her guidance, they kind of drifted. They thought that maybe the best way to protect people would be to oppress them. Kind of like a very well-intentioned traditional militaristic culture. Now, of course, she sealed them away and kind of just washed her hands of the mortal world. She didn't trust herself. She didn't trust them. Her faith in them had been broken. She thought beyond repair. So, whatever. Now, when she went into this, and she sealed them away. Now we're going to get into them a little bit more in Raskalarn's segment, and of course when I actually make them and they appear in a later video. For now, this is about Ethelynda. Now when the big war between the Immortals broke out, she tried to talk them down. She was neutral, not really on the side that wanted to eliminate the mortals or the side that wanted to protect them. Despite being the Immortal of Protection, she was done with them. At the time, she was done with their shit. And she tried to talk her siblings down, tried to keep her siblings from fighting out and killing each other. But then, when some of the other Immortals, I really need to talk to the others about who was involved in this, it's not Raskalarn, believe it or not. Raskalarn was out during this period. I'll get to that later. But some of the other Immortals decided they were worried about whether or not she would bring her weight into bear on the protection side. And they already know that, and they would probably already be aware that she can train a military force because she already had the original Ithical. But out of that fear, or maybe just out of pure bitchiness, they decided to kill off Ethelynda. She hadn't actually been expecting any of her siblings to try and kill her off when all she'd been doing was talking them down, so she was caught off guard and injured and fled to a remote fishing village in the middle of fuck all nowhere, which of course is where she met the second race of Ithical. Now I talked about this in their last segment, but I'll talk a bit more, I'm going to go in a bit more detail about her feelings in the matter, is that she was injured, panicked, and desperate when she went there. She didn't want to have to rely on humans, on mortals again. But the people there, of course, you already know, they took her in, they treated her, they defended her. And they remind her of what she'd had with the original Ithical. And of course, she made them into a new Ithical, damaging her face and damaging herself in the process. I think that is a shimmering scar just below her left eye, down the side of her neck, and across her chest. Probably, I don't actually know what it looks like, but I'm kind of imagining it as something like this number. Now of course, design-wise, and of course after that, she did eventually leave them, while still keeping in contact with them, to go back and try to talk her siblings into sense, and if that didn't work, then trying to save what lives she could of the Immortals, of the other Immortals outside the Ethical sphere of influence, and among the Immortals, as she could. Now, design-wise, it was a pain in the absolute ass finding that image, until much later when I actually was trying to find a different image and kept finding that one. Now, originally that image didn't have the armor. Thank God for Aura and a friend of ours, photoshopping skills, because it was terrible. That image originally had no armor. Aura and another friend of ours managed to get the armor on that made it really work for what I had in mind for. And of course, the image itself really reflects what I had on her. She's got this sort of very calm, very stern but not cold look. She gives off, to me at least, the impression of someone that you can kind of rely on and trust. Now, of course, we don't plan on using the Immortals much in the actual RP. They're supposed to be, for big events only. Now, Ethelynda, when she shows up, outside of combat, she's calm, kind, caring, a little strict and stern still, but she's very much like a good military commander. Someone who's stern, strict, and tough on the people she's around to try and make them better, but she does actually care about them. She wants to see them succeed, and she'll help out where she can. In battle, of course, she's still, a military commander, one of probably the most defensively minded military commanders there is. She doesn't lead the Ithical out of their home territory. They don't venture out of their home territory. They stay in the territory that has joined with them, or otherwise, they're otherwise protecting, and they don't move, and they don't go out of it. Which basically means that in order to pick a fight with Ethelynda or her people, you have to go to their turf. Now she knows this. Ethelynda, of course, is a tactician, as a commander must be. She knows this, and everything. Her fighting style is a big shield and a spear. In fact, if you'll go, hold on, I'll kind of show you the spear I have in mind. One moment. I'm coming. No idea if you heard that, but this is basically the kind of spear I had in mind for Ethelynda. About pretty long, pretty easy to use. Not exactly necessarily always easy to use one-handed if you don't know what you're doing, but it's a good weapon to have. And that, now, a shield, of course, keeps you from getting to you, and a spear, lets you keep them at range, at a distance. So, as you can see, her entire fighting style is actually defensive in nature. Her commanding style on the battlefield is very much the same way. Keep inside your fortifications, let them bash their heads against your rocks, against the walls, until they're weakened, and just start having at them when they've worn themselves out trying to pierce your defenses. Now, of course, you'll all see more and more of this as the RP goes on. We have, conflict between the Immortals and between various Immortal factions and the Mortals, all that. I'm really hoping you look forward to seeing her in action, and I look forward to riding her, to be honest. With that, I'm going to end this section on Ethelynda. Perhaps later on, as more comes to light, I'll talk more about her. We'll see. In the meantime, let's move on to Raskalarn. Okay, now Raskalarn, as you might know, just looking at her segment if you've looked at it, or looking at her page if you looked at it, is very much the opposite side of the coin to Ethelynda. She is the immortal of conquest, dominion, control, devastation. She is very dangerous, very violent-minded. She wants to rule everything. Well, okay, actually, let me rephrase that. She's not violently minded, per se, but she does, in fact, she feels that she should rule everything. That if someone ruled everything, then there wouldn't be any need for any of the other violence that came about. Now, she spends most of her time at the beginning of her history, people are going around reviving the dead and trying to build up their forces. And now, of course, at some point before this, reviving the dead, building their people, you know how it goes. At some point before this, she has approached the other immortals and tried to get them all to submit to her, peacefully. They all said, fuck no, and Ethelynda was pretty much, get the fuck out of here, you crazy bitch. Those two in particular hate each other. Now, Raskalarn is particularly bad at the whole reviving people thing, and all she manages to make is some seriously fucked up monsters. And eventually, and of course she's noticed that Ethelynda, who she considers one of her main rivals, of course, has the Ithical, her people. And she goes on, and she's trying to make her own forces and isn't doing it very well. And eventually she notices that Ethelynda abandons the Ethical when they turn on her, turn from her ways and get more violently minded, conquest minded, I guess. And noticing this, Raskalarn waits until they get desperate for some kind of guidance, someone to lead them, and promises them that if they'll serve her, she'll lead them. She won't abandon them like Ethelynda did. And of course, that particular group of Ithical join in, and she names them the Raskalarn. Again, that's all for them. We'll talk about them later. She stays with them for actually the entire start of and a massive portion of the war, of the initial bouts of conflict in the war between immortals. She doesn't she doesn't see the way things go between the immortals wanting to kill off the people of Idalos, the immortals wanting to protect them, and the ones that just don't give a fuck. She spends all her time building up her new army, getting them the way she wants them. Now, of course, she can't remove all the traces from Ethelynda, as they were originally hers. But, of course, I'll get more into that later. Done talking about them. Now, when the RP... Not necessarily when the RP starts. When the area that is her initial domain, which is on the map, the city of Corlysir, near the bottom of western Idalos. Yeah, Idalos near the Uzkernia jungle. That is her initial domain. When that area gets opened up for general play, that is when Raskalarn and her forces have returned to the playing field. Which basically means you've got an immortal of conquest who only has half a fucking idea what's going on. So that alone should provide all kinds of interesting fun when she barges in talking about things like they haven't changed since she went into her preparation time, and everyone looks at her like she's freaking so far behind the times that when everyone starts looking at her like they thought she was dead and isn't really caring much about her anymore. Even Ethelynda is more or less like, I don't give a shit. Go do something else. So of course, a lot of the plot for her and anyone who follows her is going to be figuring out where they stand in the current state of things after the initial bouts of, I'm fucking conquering everything and y'all can fucking deal with it. And Neo. But yeah, personality-wise, it's not gone into in as much detail as I suppose I should in her page, but it mentions that among forces that aren't hers, she's very wild, violent, very much a sort of force of destruction. And one of her fears is devastation, so it makes sense. But among her own people, she's it's described as let me get the quote here. Surprisingly calm and kind. Sort of what I was going for with Raskalarn is that she was a conqueror, but she wasn't a tyrant or a despot. She is a ruler, a queen or an empress. Not, she's a Roman. She's part of the inspiration for her mentality actually did come from the Roman emperors. And William the Conqueror, Vlad the Impaler, William the Conqueror, the Roman emperors, who, if you actually go back through history, were usually some pretty damn good folk. But their way of doing things alienated them from the other civilizations around them because they were very brutal, very direct. They didn't have time for they didn't debate, they didn't negotiate, they just came in and they wrecked your fucking day. Raskalarn's very much that kind of person. She does care about the people under her control, but she feels that everyone would be better off if they were under her control, and if they won't deal with it, she won't have them as a potential, and if they won't bow to her, submit to her, she won't have them as a potential enemy. She won't have them as something that might threaten her people. Like, when I said that she was the opposite side of the coin from Ethelynda, it's still very much someone who's got that kind of protection in their head, wants to protect their people. But whereas Ethelynda is the right way to go about it, the peaceful way, the nurturing way, the just way, Raskalarn is the darker side of that. She's very much the ends justify the means, convert or die kind of person. Now, a bit of what I'm going for is the fact that those two could very much be, you'll see it when they interact in the RP, but those two could very much be good friends if only one of them could see what the other person's going for. If they could understand the other person's point of view. But both of them are too much they're very much what they are. What they are prevents them. Their very nature prevents them from understanding each other's point of view. So it comes off very much as two people who could have been great friends trying to protect their ideals from someone they view as the absolute threat to to their ideals. As someone they view as their biggest and greatest enemy in any circumstance. I view it as something that has the potential for a lot of tragedy involved between those two. Whoever wins in the end. Even I haven't decided that, and I may never decide it. What I want to do with them is have a lot of tragedy as you keep as events force them to work together or ally with each other for various reasons, and you sort of see what could have been, but what can't be because of what they are. And the kind of the Raskalarn is supposed to be the kind of villain that you feel like you could reason with if you could just break through to them. But what they are, their very being prevents you from getting through to them. But hopefully that turns out to be as good a plot line as I'm planning. Now for her fighting style, you'll notice in her image she's got the glowing claw and the big ass sword and the legions and the ghostly spirit things. I haven't quite figured out what those are supposed to be. Maybe they're an enemy she's fighting. I kind of like that notion actually. But the claw thing is supposed to be basically the source of all her non-physical powers. She doesn't actually do a lot of standing back doing mumbo jumbo. No any kind of magical, non-contact magical influence. All of her supernatural powers, her powers are pushed through that claw. Basically, she actually has to touch something to use her power on it. Which means in combat, which means in the RP you won't see her as the kind of person that stands back and flings ice or fireballs or lightning or something like that. She's very much in your face, a very violent, in your face kind of fighter. And with her powers, it's very much. If you've ever played Devil May Cry 4, think the Devil Buster that Nero uses, and you'll be kind of close. A lot of physical interaction with stuff around her when she's fighting through the claw. Now, her sword, of course, in the image is depicted as, big, badass, heavy piece of frickin' metal that you probably can't even fucking pick up. Now, of course, while the design I like, the shape doesn't work. Like, the size doesn't work. What you're looking at is probably something more like this in the actual RP, what I'm going for. A bit heavier, a bit thicker, but not necessarily, like RPG video game sword kind of dimensions. I love the design, and I did notice that tapers off near the end, so I might actually be a little wrong. I'd have to see like a full image. If I can, I might get someone to like draw the sword out for me, show you what I mean, kind of. But yeah. Now, hopefully, that's all I really have to say on Raskalarn at the moment. She's not quite as unique as the others, but I want her to play off. Not unique, I guess. Maybe unique as Ethelynda. I don't know. Whatever. But I want her to play off Ethelynda as sort of a foil. And personality-wise, again, she's supposed to be someone you think you should get through to. Think like and the kind of person you actually enjoy their antics. Think if you've ever played, not exactly a cartoony type of villain, very serious, but someone you still enjoy reading about, and would want to see more of, rather than someone you're just like, oh, that person needs to die. Someone you want to see stick around, someone you want to see even win occasionally, and you want to see more of. Hopefully that comes through, and hopefully y'all enjoy reading about her, seeing what she gets up to, and joining in, if you got that kind of player, joining in on her campaigns and conquests. Because for her followers, her sphere of control, I don't plan on having them sit around and not do much. You'll see when we get there, when I get to talking about them, you'll see what I mean. I plan on having that one be a very exciting, very action-filled kind of plot line. But in the meantime, that's I've been at this for like 43, 44 frickin' minutes now, possibly even 45. It's getting up there. So it's time for this video to be done. I will see you all in the next development diary. It'll probably be shorter, but in the meantime, this has been Basilisk, and I will see you all in the next development diary. Have fun, enjoy yourselves, and have a great time on standing trials. Thank you, and good night, folks.